Well, hello, Heather, and thanks for joining us today for our ESF meeting and presentation. Heather Schrock is the Bonneville Environmental Foundation's Partnership Director. Her role involves interacting with various entities, including nonprofits that want to see a reduction in carbon energy and water footprint. And the Bonneville Environmental Partnership Foundation offers carbon offsets and water restoration certificate supports for emissions impacts reductions. All right. So, unfortunately, Mike Unger couldn't be here to host the meeting, but I'm doing it in his stead. I'm Adam Rittenauer, and we're gonna hear from Heather now. Thank you much.
Thank you so much, Adam, and I send my best wishes along to Mike. I hope everything goes smoothly today. I'm really excited to be here and share some of the amazing work that Bonneville Environmental Foundation does. I've been with the organization for about 8 years, and I love being in the presence of engineers. I am not an engineer, but my father is an engineer, and he has worked most of his life in the solar energy industry in various aspects, including project development and patenting several different. He's an inventor as well, so he's patented several different doodads over the year. He calls them that himself. But among those are special fittings for solar panels to be attached to various types of roofs that are not your typical type of roof. So that's something he does a lot of work in. But over the years, he's done lots of project design. So I have a strong affinity for engineers, and I love the work that you all do. So as an engineer's daughter, I did find my way into environmental work because my dad, who is an engineer, is also a self-proclaimed hippie and environmentalist, and has definitely instilled that in me as well. Um, I have a degree in music, but I found my way to environmental work over the years, and have been at Bonneville Environmental Foundation for 8 years. So I will get back to my job a little bit more, which has to do a bit more with the partnership development around carbon emissions, carbon credits, and such. But first, I'd love to just jump in and start with a background on Bonneville Environmental Foundation as a whole, because my work would not be needed if it wasn't for the mission impact work of the environmental organization itself. Also, along the way, please feel free to jump in and ask questions. Feel free to come off mute, or just throw a question in the chat. I'll try and monitor that as well. This is going to be pretty casual, conversational style. I don't really have any slides or anything. I'm going to share our work, and feel free to jump in and join the conversation if you have questions or comments or thoughts that you want to share as well. Also, if anybody would like to put their name and location in the chat, that's always nice for me to see as well. I see some of your names on the screen, but not everybody. Um, and let's see, I'm going to start with a background on Bonneville Environmental Foundation. We are a 501(c)(3) nonprofit based in Portland, Oregon. We've been around for over 25 years, and we have three main pillars of work. One pillar is water restoration. The number two is equitable renewable energy development and deployment. And number three is STEM education. And as engineers, I'm sure you know what STEM means, but for anybody who's questioning that acronym, it is science, technology, engineering, and math education. So I'll start with the water conservation work, water restoration and conservation work. Um, that work goes back to kind of our beginning days over 25 years ago when we were founded. We were doing a lot of the traditional type of conservation work, but working a lot with tribes and multi-stakeholder partnership and facilitation to bring many people to the table to discuss and make long-term holistic watershed health plans for these watersheds that involved everybody, not just one particular group's interests, but multiple grouped interests, which included agricultural interests, municipality interests, corporate or industrial interests, and of course, environmental and tribal interests. So we've been doing that work for many years in various watersheds. And what grew out of that work, in particular, was some of the industrial and corporate um, water users wanted to develop more sustainable water stewardship plans that involved something that they felt would be similar to how folks are addressing carbon emissions. So we developed our Business for Water Stewardship program, and we also developed a product called the Water Restoration Certificate, which is similar to a carbon credit, and I'll talk more about that specifically later as well. But this work has grown into a multi-billion gallon restoration project, and by that restoration program, and by that I mean through the program, we have restored billions of gallons of water to their natural watersheds. And what I mean by that is something a little different from conservation. In conservation, you are conserving the environment, but a lot of times people think of conservation from a business perspective as conserving water within your four walls, within your operation, using less water, turning the taps on less. That is all very important, and we support that for our clients. But what our main work is what we call more restoration, where we're keeping water in the natural resources. So streams and riverbeds that run dry, we're trying to get those waters flowing again, reducing the extractions from them. There's multiple ways to do this work. We work with, again, many project and stakeholders across the board. But this work is mainly in North America. We have a very strong program in the Columbia River and the Colorado River Basin going, and very strong work happening in Arizona, some of the most water areas at the most water risk of having their resources depleted. So that's our water restoration work, and our Business for Water Stewardship program is under that work. One of the other areas that we work in is that equitable renewable energy deployment. And that pillar of work has progressed from back in the day, 25 years ago. It was mainly focused on just deploying renewable energy without a focus on the equitable piece of it. Back then, just getting renewable energy on the grid was the main goal. As renewable energy, as that industry has developed, what we've seen is that certain communities have fallen behind, reaping the benefits of that energy, including low-income communities, tribal communities, and other communities, rural communities, for example, that haven't been able to access that kind of energy resource, not only for the effects on climate change and to reduce emissions, but also for resilience, and even to save money as renewable energy has become more affordable. These communities could benefit, and we provide development of these types of projects, community solar that provides bill savings for several communities where they actually save money on their bills by participating in community solar programs, and also tribal communities, helping them develop and deploy their own renewable energy resources for their own sovereignty and resilience as well. And a program that came out of that program, I'm just going to pause for just a second. That's two of our main pillars. I'm going to get to the third one in a second. But before I move on, that was a lot of content. I just want to check in on everybody. Any questions about either of those programs, about our water restoration or our renewable energy program so far? I'm going to take a sip of tea. All right, I'll move on to our third pillar of work, which is our STEM education program called CE Bright Futures. Another gap we identified, I would say maybe 15 years ago in our work, that we felt would be a hindrance to further renewable energy development was a lack of education, specifically around energy and even more specifically around renewable energy. So we started a program back then that we called Solar for Our Schools. At the time, we were installing solar panels, like demonstration solar panels on school grounds, maybe on a roof or maybe somewhere on the grounds. And we would do educational, workshops with teachers and students to teach them about that renewable energy. They had hands-on connection to that to those panels to kind of see the amount of energy they were producing, and they could develop curriculum around that. And since then, the program has grown exponentially. It is a nationwide program. We don't do the demonstration solar ourselves anymore. Instead, we've turned it into a fellowship program where teachers become clean energy fellows, and we have cohorts of these energy fellows all over the country. And we are working with the school districts and the teachers to develop K through 12 curriculum that will be legacy curriculum. So instead of it being kind of a one-off, you know, panel on one school with one or two workshops, this is curriculum that lives within these school districts for 10 to 15 years. We have a curriculum library available for all teachers to use for free, but we do enjoy working with those cohorts of teachers and school districts to help us develop the curriculum that they think their students would most benefit from. So that program has won the EPA Green Power Award twice. We're really proud of that program, and it's touched the lives of over 300,000 students. And we've provided over 1,500 hours of continuing education credits to the teachers themselves for participating, and we are able to also provide them stipends. So it's a really impactful program, and it continues to grow. So those are our three areas of mission impact work. Again, I'll pause here for just a second. Anybody have questions about any of those areas? Okie doke. So the reason I wanted to give a really thorough background on BEF's work is because the work that I do as the partnership director is in support of all of that work. And it aligns with our mission, but our main mission impact work is those three pillars. And what I do is I sell carbon credits, renewable energy certificates, and water restoration certificates to businesses and other entities like sports teams, universities, other nonprofits to help them with their own environmental impacts. And that not only aligns with our mission impact and our values, but it provides unrestricted revenue for all of those programs. So most people in this space, if you've ever talked to anyone who is in the carbon credit space, for example, they are mostly for-profit businesses, and nothing wrong with that. But we do kind of approach it from a different perspective, using it as a way to raise revenue for those mission impact programs. I jokingly refer to myself as the gift shop manager because it's a similar model to, say, a humane society that has a gift shop. They are selling products to raise revenue to support the shelter itself. And that's kind of what I do. But it allows me the opportunity to work with hundreds of really amazing businesses of all sizes who are really concerned and want to work on their own environmental footprint. And these are just some of the tools available for that. There's, of course, a lot of other things businesses can do to be sustainable. But in these areas, this is what we do as a nonprofit to raise revenue for those programs. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about carbon credits, renewable energy certificates, and water restoration certificates, as that is, we're now getting to my area of specialty and what I get to work on day in and day out. And again, feel free to come off mute, ask questions, throw anything into the chat if you're curious or have thoughts or want to contribute to the conversation. So I'm going to start with the water restoration certificates because that is a really unique product that BEF actually, we developed that product ourselves. So it is a proprietary environmental product. And it is one certificate is the equivalent to 1,000 gallons of water restored to critically depleted watersheds. And so what we do, and this is something that's different from the carbon credit and REC models, which are a much broader market that thousands of entities participate in and develop projects for and fund. BEF is the primary funder and project developer for water restoration certificate projects. And these are projects that range from agricultural water restoration to more habitat, wetland restoration, more natural habitat restoration. But ultimately, the projects that we fund are put through a third-party validation where, and usually it's actually a water engineering firm that validates how many gallons of water in a year were restored or were avoided from being extracted. We call that restoration. So avoided from being extracted through these projects And they validate that, and we turn it into a certificate and put it on a registry called the market registry. And then we sell those certificates to, again, fund more projects. So we are funding the projects up front and then hoping to recoup those funds through selling these certificates. And you can be using these certificates for your business water footprint or for your personal water footprint. Hi, Edward. I see you joining us on camera. Did you have a question for me?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. Just wanted to say hi then. Thank you. Um, So this is a unique proprietary certificate, as I said, that BEF funds every year. We select between 8 and 12 projects across the U.S. in watersheds that need our support. And then we hope to sell through all the water restoration certificates the next year once the reporting is in. So that is what a water restoration certificate is. And it was modeled after renewable energy certificates and carbon credits. So I'll go to renewable energy certificates next if there's no questions about, oh, I should say, I wanted to just give an example of a water restoration project that we are currently doing. Um, One of the project types is a water rights project. If you're familiar with water rights at all, you may know that water rights laws were written many, many years ago, and we're not considering the environmental impacts of awarding water rights to places where maybe they didn't need them or didn't need as much. And so the extractions were happening. And the way the water rights laws are written is that if you are awarded water rights, it's a use it or lose it law. So if you don't use all the water that you've been awarded, say you're a farmer and you're awarded 1 million gallons of water rights, and say that year you only needed 500,000 gallons, if you don't use that water, then you could lose your water rights. So farmers don't want to lose those water rights. So um, what we do is intervene and basically pay the farmer for their water rights, which can be a water rights. It's a legal contract, and then they don't have to use that water. And when they use it, but they don't need it, it's just a lot of waste. They're extracting water from a natural resource. They might be flooding or just dumping it somewhere else where it sinks into groundwater or picks up nutrients, and then it's not staying in the natural resource like the river or creek or stream where it might be needed for, animal habitats, fish habitats, and water for everyone else that usually benefits from that river, creek, or stream. So that's an example, and then that savings is converted to water restoration certificates. So that kind of gives you a little insight into the model that is the basic model for environmental products that we work with. So renewable energy certificates are a similar model. These are certificates that are created from every 1,000 kilowatt hours of renewable energy produced. Renewable energy certificates for voluntary use, however, is newer than what renewable energy certificates were really originally created for. Renewable energy certificates were, back in the day, I think they were called green tags. They had a few different names, but really it was just a massive tracking system because once the energy was created, and this is probably stuff that you all are very familiar with as engineers, but once the energy is created, no matter the source, whether it's coal or solar, that kilowatt hour is dumped into the grid and it's lost. There's no way to tag it, so to speak. So was no way to really track, who was using or claiming that renewable energy, usage. There was generation, but the usage wasn't able to be tracked very easily. So this system was created for utilities to track renewable energy. Those of you at BPA, I'm sure, are familiar with this. And then the voluntary market, which BEF actually helped support and create a voluntary market, was created for folks who did want to support renewable energy and wanted to be able to claim they were using renewable energy for their own business or personal practices. So that's where the REC certificate came into play. And if you purchase, a REC certificate, you can claim that you are using 1,000 kilowatt hours of renewable energy. And that is tracked again on this massive tracking system through the grids. And once somebody claims that, that REC is retired and is not able to be claimed again by someone else. So those tracking systems help prevent any double claiming or double usage. So that's Rex. We also sell Rex for, again, for businesses and all kinds of entities that want to support renewable energy and make sustainability claims about their usage of renewable energy. Because not everybody can put a solar panel on their business. A lot of businesses are in large buildings or other places where it's not possible to actually do it yourself. And it's also not financially feasible to do it yourself for a lot of smaller businesses. So it allows that renewable energy market participation for all size of businesses. It's also the main instrument used for any kind of personal renewable energy purchases through your utility, like a green power program. So both PGE and Pacific Power have their green energy programs that you can subscribe to as a resident, and renewable energy certificates is the underlying instrument that they are using to track that usage. Okay, so I will stop there again, take a quick sip of my water. Any questions about WRCs, water restoration certificates, or renewable energy certificates? All right, thanks again for allowing me some time and space here to share about these environmental products and how they help with sustainability measures. I am going to talk about carbon credits for most of the rest of the time because I know that's one of the main reasons we gathered here was to talk about carbon emissions and carbon credits. But thanks for allowing me some time to give some context there about what environmental products are and what BEF is doing and the role that these products play in our world. So, carbon credits, or carbon offsets, as they have been called in the past, we tend to want to call them carbon credits because offset implies an action that they may or may not actually be used for. It is a popular usage of them to say you have offset your greenhouse gas emissions, and that is okay to say that. But we like to use the word credit because they can be used for mitigation. They can be used just to support greenhouse gas emissions reductions without it being correlated necessarily with a one-to-one offset to your own emissions, whether it's your personal or business emissions. So I'm going to speak mostly about carbon credits in the context of business emissions usage. Um, but a lot of this can apply to personal emissions as well, of course, and we do have calculators online, which I'll share the link to at the end here. So carbon credits are basically a financial mechanism to connect those who want to reduce emissions beyond their own, conservation and efficiencies, who want to reduce unavoidable emissions to projects that need funding that will reduce emissions. So it's really just a financial mechanism. It's the go-between. The people who have the ability to reduce emissions, say for example, a farmer, a dairy farmer, is running a farm with all these cows that are emitting, greenhouse gases, but the farmer doesn't have it necessarily in their mind or in their interests or financial capability to install any kind of machinery or methodologies that would actually reduce the emissions from the cows. But if you have, for example, over here, an airline who does have that funding and does have a sustainability commitment to invest in carbon reduction against their own footprint, then the carbon credit can be the financial mechanism through which that funding can reach the farm to reduce the emission from the cows. So that's just kind of a very simple example of how carbon credits are really a financial mechanism. There are lots of definitions of carbon credits out there, but it's important to remember that ultimately they are a financial mechanism. One carbon credit is the equivalent of 1 metric ton or 1,000 kilograms of greenhouse gas emissions, either reduced or removed from the atmosphere. And that's an important distinction because those are they're two different types of carbon credits. And they come at a different price point. They come with a different type of, methodology, but removing carbon from the atmosphere is much more challenging and much more expensive in most cases than avoiding the release of greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, that farmer wants to avoid the release of those greenhouse gas emissions. So, most of those types of projects are capturing the greenhouse gas emissions and either destroying them or converting them to something less harmful for our atmosphere. A true removal would be something like air capture, of course, is what most people think of, but there's other things like biochar, which actually remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So those two types of carbon credits are important to keep in mind, that there's removals and avoidance of greenhouse gas emissions. And then the other distinction or sub-distinction is nature-based and non-nature-based. And these all come with their own sets of benefits and challenges, of course. But a nature-based example would be what probably most people think of when they think of a carbon credit, and that would be forestry. A forestry carbon credit. There are multiple types of forestry carbon credits. Of course, there's everything from tree planting to what's called IFM, which is basically improved forestry management. There are several practices that you can put in place as you manage a forest to help reduce emissions or remove emissions from the atmosphere. So as the tree grows, it of course absorbs more carbon from it. So those forestry management projects vary widely in the practices they use. Tree planting is another practice. And then non-nature based is the other type. And that's going to be things like the farmer, or landfill gas sequestration, or HFC, hydrofluorocarbon, refrigerants, for example, capturing those or stopping leaks. HFC leaks are rampant in several industries, including HVAC industry and refrigeration industry. So all the refrigerators at your local grocery store. It is a big problem that there are so many leaks. So going through and stopping those leaks is another example of a project type. BEF represents maybe about a dozen different project types right now. And among those, we do have nature-based and non-nature-based. Just pulling up a little list here that kind of helped me remember some of our projects. So we have nature-based forestry projects. We also have some agricultural grassland projects that allow for the grasslands to be restored while also allowing ranchers to use those lands and sustainably graze them. We have landfill gas sequestration and combustion, and then we do have that HFC reclamation type projects that I've spoken of before. So we do have a nice variety of those types of projects. Any questions, thoughts, concerns? Anybody want to jump in? I don't see anything going on in the chat just yet. Okie doke. So those are some different types of projects. So what I'd like to talk about now is basically how a carbon credit is created. It's a very, it's an opaque process to some extent that is becoming more transparent. And it is definitely one of the challenges of the carbon credit market is to become more and more transparent, which will provide us with more and more integrity. The carbon credit market was founded upon several ideas that at the beginning were thought to be giving it a high level of integrity. And over the years, because of the way different market players have interacted with the market, it has kind of wavered over the years. And I guess not necessarily the integrity itself, although some projects certainly have had issues with that. As in any industry, there's going to be the players that sometimes make mistakes or do things that aren't quite up to the level that they're supposed to be. But for the most part, the core principles that are in place to create a carbon credit have stayed the same. And over the years, we've added more integrity and more checks and balances on top of those. I did see something come in through the chat. Are you doing videos about these credit activities? Do you mean videos about like the different types of credits, all the different types of credits? Feel free to come off mute if you want Edward to ask your question too.
Um, what I was hoping was that these were things that you were proud about, and you actually created a library of videos that would inform us about them.
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of different videos for different organizations. I haven't exactly created a library of videos, but that's a great idea. And Yeah, I definitely, I mean, I am in this industry day in and day out for 8 years. I think very deeply about all of these things and certainly have a lot of conversations with my clients and with folks like you about all of the different types of carbon credits and the types of methodologies that we as an organization, of course, as a nonprofit environmental organization, want to stay on top of the highest quality and highest integrity types of carbon credits. So unfortunately, this time I don't really have a library of videos, but I'm always open to have a conversation and answer specific questions about any of the types of carbon credits. And after the call, I'm happy to share our current carbon credit menu with all of you so you can see each carbon credit is laid out with the name and a description and a link to the registry where all the white papers and documentation are about each methodology and each specific project. And as I get into how carbon credits are created, I'll talk more about what that documentation is. But thanks for your question, Edward.
Thanks for the
So
answer.
yeah, no problem. So how carbon credits are created? Again, keep in mind the at its core, the carbon credit is a financial mechanism. So first and foremost, there has to be funding, and that funding can come from several different sources. So there's many players that kind of have to get together at the beginning of the process. And we actually get a lot of calls, even though we aren't a carbon credit developer ourselves. We do get a lot of calls of people wanting to develop carbon credits with us, and I have lots of people to refer them to, but I usually always take at least an initial call to help them be aware of a little bit of what the process is like because I am familiar with the basics of what that process is like. And it's not a simple process, it's not an easy process, and it's not a cheap process. So at the beginning, there has to be some kind of funding or funder. There has to be a project or project activity that someone has thought of. Like, I'm just going to keep using the cows because I like cows, but cows emit methane. And so, mostly from their mouth, by the way, a lot of people don't realize that the methane is mostly coming out the front end. So, there's somebody who's like, well, I'm a farmer and I have these cows that emit methane, but I don't have funding. And honestly, I don't have time or energy. I'm running a farm here to do this, but if you tell me how to do it and you make it easy for me and I can make some money, sure, might be interested in that. So there's I would say the project activity owner, the person who's doing the thing. That could be, for example, a municipality who's running a landfill. It could be a timber company wanting to improve their forestry management. So the owner of the activity itself could be many, many different types of entities. Everything from governmental, non-governmental, nonprofits, individual farm owners or landowners. So it's important to know that project activity owner, who's the expert on the activity itself, could be anybody. Really different types of folks do that. The funders, again, could be sometimes governmental, sometimes a bank or an investment firm or a nonprofit or anyone who is interested in investing in that. There are whole companies that are basically dedicated to investing in carbon credits as well. So you've got your funder, you've got your activity owner, and then the third piece of yes, we do have forestry credits. Edward, I'd be happy to talk about those in a second. And then the third piece, the third leg of the stool, I should say, with the activity owner, the funder, and that's the carbon credit industry professional. There's usually somebody who knows the ins and outs of what you have to do, of how you take this money and work with this farmer and get through the process of creating a carbon credit. And the process itself involves many, many steps. So first of all, you have to have what's called a methodology or a protocol, and that is the science. That is the science behind what makes the carbon reduction or the carbon avoidance or the removal. And these methodologies all live in these registries. So there's several registries. There's probably 4 or 5 main ones that have the most integrity that we work with. And the registries hold the information, they hold the documentation. And when I send you the carbon credit menu, you can click on the link that takes you to the registry for each project. And you can, if you really like diving into very long documentation and white papers, you can see kind of the science and methodology behind each of those projects. But the methodology is important, and there are hundreds of methodologies already available that people have thought of and developed, written down, submitted to the registries, they've been approved. So you need to be under one of these methodologies. If you have a great idea, but you don't have a methodology that exists yet in one of the registries, then you have to develop that as well, and it has to be approved. So that could be an extra step. Again, people come to me all the time with wonderful ideas, and I'm like, I don't know if there's a methodology for that because I personally don't have them all memorized. But the first task I give them is you need to see if there's a methodology already, and if not, then it's going to be a definitely extra time and expense to see if there to develop a methodology. So that again is the science under which, or the basically how you measure the emissions impacts. So once you have a methodology, then you approach the registry that you want to register with, and then you basically submit your project idea, and they have to approve it. And so usually it's the expert that leg of the stool that's the expert in the industry is going to do a lot of that footwork and the documentation, and that's what they're good at. So they document it, they use the right language, they know how to submit it to the registries, and how to describe these projects. So after that, project basically launches. So whatever the activity is, say it's installing that methane sequestration equipment into a dairy farmer's property. So then that happens, and then you have to let the project run. And usually it's on an annual basis, although some projects that are smaller might do it every 2 or 3 years, but usually on an annual basis. Then you have to gather the data and have it verified. I skipped validation. Validation's at the beginning. That's a third party has to come in. So that's another expense. You have to pay for a third party to come in and validate that the project does what it says it's going to do and meets the methodology. And then they submit that to the registry, and they're like, okay, this project is ready to go. Then on the back end of each year that the project runs, now it has to be verified every year for how many metric tons were actually reduced or avoided. And it has to get that stamp of approval. And then those metric tons are registered on the registry, and then they are available to sell or go out into the universe wherever they end up, brokerages, firms, businesses. BEF is one of the entities that would purchase these credits. We don't purchase them from the registry, by the way. We purchase them from whoever the developer is or the owner of them are. The registry does not exchange money on behalf of the individual carbon credits. They are making their model's different. They're making money from the registration fees and from the methodologies and other things like that. And they are all mostly nonprofits as well. So now these credits are in the universe, and BEF buys large amounts of them to support these projects, and then we sell them to smaller entities so that they can offset, if they wish, their own carbon footprint or mitigate climate challenges, whatever their sustainability reason is for purchasing these credits. We are a provider of those credits. And to answer your question, yes, we are working with forestry credits. Currently, we have two actually on our menu. One in Alaska, it's called Kootznoowoo, and that is a Native American, it's an Alaskan tribal nation carbon credit project. And then the other one is Blandon Hardwoods Forestry, and that one is in Minnesota. So we do have two of those right now. But we go through our inventory similarly, again, like the gift shop. Carbon projects come and go. We may sell out of a certain project, and we may buy more of it, or we may buy a different project to bring into our portfolio to then make available to our partners and clients and customers. So let me take a look here at my notes. Okay, so I think I've gotten through most of how the carbon credit is created, all the validation and third-party validation and verification, which, by the way, are usually two different entities, to, again, just checks and balances, making sure that the science says it's going to do what it's going to do. And then once it's done, validating that it actually happened, validating the amount, and then having that registered and then it goes into the marketplace. And at the end of its life, this is one of the most important things about carbon credits. At the end of its life, it has to be retired. And by that, I mean, if you, for example, purchase 5 metric tons of carbon credits for your own personal carbon footprint, we, on your behalf, who have the relationship with that registry, we retire them, which means they are marked off. They cannot be sold, traded, transferred in any way anymore. And those metric tons are yours to claim that you've reduced through your purchase. So again, I know that was a lot of information, and I wanted to just take another pause before I talk about just a few important, one more really important tenet of carbon credits, which is called additionality. Okay, so one more thing I'd like to mention about carbon credits before I move on to talking about calculators is that every carbon credit through any of the 4 or 5 major registries that we work with at least has to meet a criteria called additionality. And what that means is that the carbon credit would not exist in the absence of the carbon credit market. So carbon credits cannot be created from activities that were already going to happen. It cannot be created from activities that are mandated to happen. It cannot be created from activities that are fully funded and were basically going to happen anyway. That is what additionality means. So that's why, for example, the farmer, that methane was not going to be captured. It was not in the farmer's vision or capacity, funding. There was no way that methane was going to be captured. And it is, as of now, still not mandated for it to happen by any law or legislation, right? So that is a perfect example of an additional project. And additionality isn't necessarily a black or white thing. It is definitely a gray scale. So some projects can be more additional than others, but it has to meet a certain level of additionality. And there's various additionality tests that are done on a project when it's being validated to make sure that it is additional. And it could be financial additionality. It could be business as usual, for example, the farmer. It could be compliance or legislative additionality, which means that it was not going to happen because there's nobody making it happen. There's no laws. Landfills didn't used to have to capture their greenhouse gases, but as times have gone on, more and more legislation has come into play that makes them do that, certain ones. So that type of carbon credit is not really additional anymore once it's past a certain date. So while the landfill gas ones that we have still meet that additionality, but moving into the future, anywhere that does put any kind of legislation into place that says you have to do this, they will become not additional anymore for those particular landfills. So I hope that makes sense. Additionality can be a confusing topic, but I know you're all smart engineers, so probably makes a lot of sense to you all. Okay, so one of the things that Mike asked me to talk about is calculating your emissions, and I am going to drop this link into the chat. So this is our BEF store and calculator, the home of our BEF store and calculator. Let me make sure I've got it up here too. So you can see if you wanted to click on that now, or you can just listen and go to it later if you'd like. On that page, we have a few different types of calculators on there, which any of you are welcome to use and play around with. These calculators, we like to, be very clear that these are estimations. Of course, it's very challenging to get a perfect carbon footprint done, but we provide these as a tool to help folks at least start with their estimations. And if you have certain data that you can access, it'll get more and more accurate. So for example, if you have the exact utility bill with the exact number of kilowatt hours that your business used that year, then you can enter that and get an equivalent to metric tons. But if you don't have that, you could estimate based on square footage. Isn't as accurate, but at least it's better than not having any data at all. So there's, and we use several sources for all of these estimations. So you can go in here and either try and do your whole business footprint. You can do your home footprint. We do also have a shortcut to the flight calculator since that's one of the biggest impacts is flying. It does have a good sized footprint, so you can just do your flights if you want and calculate that. And then, of course, it takes you straight to our carbon credit store where you could purchase carbon credits if you'd like to offset that footprint. So the business calculator asks for kind of basic business data like, as I said, electricity, travel, commuting. There's several things that you can calculate beyond what our calculator does that are much more I would say bespoke or much more kind of getting into the weeds. But there certainly are things that you can do like transmission line losses, but those get quite complicated and it's already very challenging to build an online calculator. So we kind of stuck with some of the most basic ones again, just to provide a starter tool for folks. But if you wanted to dive deeper into greenhouse gas calculations for a business, there is the greenhouse gas protocols. And Greenhouse Gas Protocol has provided a framework for calculating but business footprint, and that includes three scopes: direct emissions, and then two types of indirect emissions. There's indirect emissions from purchased electricity, steam or heat, and there's indirect emissions from pretty much everything else. So that's flights and commuting and stuff like that. So what that means, direct or indirect, is the difference between your business owning or controlling the emission versus your business having the indirect emission. So a flight is a great example. Your business doesn't, unless you do own a private jet or your business does own a plane, you're taking commercial flights. So it's not technically your direct emissions. It's indirect because you are getting on a commercial airline and it's the fuel from that that is causing the emission versus say you do own a fleet of vehicles. Those are owned emissions. It's scope one direct emissions. So you would be taking responsibility for those scope one emissions that are more direct. So we have a little bit of both direct and indirect in the calculator. We basically kind of tried to pick the lowest hanging fruit of the emissions that are easiest to calculate so that folks at least can try their hand at trying to calculate their emissions footprint. So I think I've hit on all the things that I wanted to talk about today. I'd love to open it up. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if there's questions, conversation, anything I didn't cover, or you would like me to cover a little bit more in depth, I will take a sip of tea while you're thinking about that. So I either did a really thorough presentation or y'all are eating lunch out there.
Deafening silence. Sorry about that.
Kidding. No, it's okay. I'm just kidding. Yeah, any questions or other thoughts? Really happy again to be here today to provide this information about our organization and what we do, and a little more information about carbon credits, which can be definitely an interesting and confusing topic. So, Adam, any thoughts from you?
I'd be interested to look more into the methodology and how you validate your credits because I know that that is a big problem in
Hmm.
the whole credit space because, anybody can just sell a carbon credit, but whether it actually reduces real emissions in the real world is a whole different thing, and that is not an easy task, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, so I'll send at least to Mike and hopefully he can forward. I don't well, or if you could put your email in the chat,
Sure,
Adam,
I
then I
can.
can send it to you if you want to distribute it to folks. I'll send you our carbon credit menu, and that has on the last column, it does have the registry links that have all of the. I'll make sure to copy that before we get offline here. Um, that contains, again, what I jokingly call the pages and pages of documentation, but it's a lot of documentation. And the methodologies live in those registries. So once you click through to that, you can really take a deep dive into those methodologies and kind of see what they're doing, what the science and the math is behind all of that. Some of the issues with carbon credits, yes, you're right, has been the integrity of that. And while you can certainly say anybody can sell a carbon credit, and sure, anyone probably could set that up. I think if you go into it not knowing, that a carbon credit, like if you can't get a link like this to a legitimate registry and that it shows you that this is like a legitimate, verified, validated, it should be in one of these registries, then I would beware. If you are on any website that says they're selling a carbon credit and they can't name the registry and give you the link to the registry, that is a big red flag. So that would be something I would definitely look out for. Um, and then some of the other issues with carbon credits have been more on the user side, which is really unfortunate, how users are making claims around them. But some of the things that have been layered now on top of the carbon credit industry, there's organizations. One is called ICROA and another one is called ICVCM. Both acronyms that I always forget what they stand for, but the ICVCM is the International Validation Carbon Market. I'm going to forget what the acronym is for, but these are organizations that have now come in to support the carbon market industry with deeper integrity. And they have like these kind of lists of best practices and what to look for when you're purchasing a carbon credit. There's also the Oxford carbon credit rules. And all of these resources I'd be happy to send you afterwards. But going into buying a carbon credit cold without knowing much about it, you can certainly get duped into purchasing something that doesn't exist. But once you kind of know some of the basics, like the registries, some of the basic principles, the Oxford principles, the greenhouse gas protocols, and you're looking for credits that have been approved by ICVCM and or ICROA, you're going to get a much more higher quality credit with the veracity. And those, of course, are the only ones that we work with. We do our, we layer on those things in addition to our own vetting because we have such a small selective portfolio. We're vetting them ourselves as well. So I hope that answers some of your questions. I think, can you name a few of your customers? Absolutely. I actually was just on the phone with one right before this, We Communications. I mean, there's a lot of OTAC, I'm trying to think of more local ones, to Portland even. Markowitz Herbold as a law firm here. I work with Cotopaxi, a lot of outdoor industry folks like Cotopaxi and North Face. I always, when I'm put on the spot, I'm like, trying to remember the names of all my customers. WM, Waste Management, is one of our clients. ECOS, which makes a lot of like soaps and things. Dr. Bronner's also. Obaz Footwear. Definitely a whole bunch of clients. I think this last year I personally worked with about 300 clients across the US and also some international clients. So yeah, hopefully that helps. That's a few of my clients. Nike, that's a big local one, Nike. Adidas, Outdoor Research. Hopworks is a good local one. We love Hopworks. We work with Hopworks.
I love that place.
Yeah, me too. Oregon State University. And they're starting to come now. Brew Doctor, another local, the kombucha Brew Doctor folks. So yeah. Yes. Yes, this is my husband's speakeasy that I'm coming to you from today. He he is a bourbon hound, so I get to have a lot of bourbon bottles back there. Thanks, Jack. What is that in your background, Jack? That looks like a recording instrument device. Oh, I can't hear you, unfortunately. Darn it.
Yeah, you must be double muted, Jack, because your mute's off, but
I know it doesn't
I
look
can't
like
hear
you're
you.
muted, unfortunately. Well, it looks cool. We can speculate about what's in your
It's
background.
a reel-to-reel of some
It
kind.
looks like, yeah, I was like
Old school
recording in your,
audio with a Wi-Fi router on top.
yeah, yep. Well, again, thanks so much, Adam, or anybody else have any last thoughts or questions? I'd be happy to take them in these last few minutes, but I hope this was helpful and good
Yep.
information for you all. Feel free to go to our web store there with the calculators, check those out, and I will send Adam some follow-up resource materials for the methodologies, the registries, and our carbon credit menu. So again, feel free to take a deep dive on any of those or reach out to me. Feel free to share my email as well. If anybody has follow-up questions, I'd love to chat with you about any of this.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Great presentation. We really
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Yeah, thank you so much. Take care, everybody.